The first story under the title The Chariot of Death. There are spoiled children, but Rodrigo, he was a real abuser with his mother. He learned it from his father, who was a macho beater. One day he came home very drunk, and as expected, his mother was the victim of the hangover he felt. The lady was already very deteriorated by the abuse, since it was not someone really old. She only worked and received mistreatment from her only son. The loud arrived totally drunk, screaming, kicking and cursing, spitting in his mother's face, that because he hadn't died, that it was about time, that he shouldn't get in the way. Hearing these screams, especially the death part, the neighbors decided to intervene, to protect the defenseless woman, and took care of running the ungrateful and wicked son out of the house. That is, they kicked him out of the house. Once the morning came, the talkers and chatterboxes of the town were in the streets to have their usual gossip of what happened. Everyone gave their own story of what had happened, but there was one of these versions that got on everyone's nerves. The most Rosandra of the group of gossips recounted that she had heard the carriage that was driving death rolling along the rocky and dusty roads. She was surely the terrifying cart, because her wheels did not sound, but the wail of a tortured soul is heard at every turn. This caused great commotion. The women were dumbfounded. In that came Rodrigo, that he was still extremely drunk. This intensified the hubbub. He stamped his feet at the entrance to his mother's house, claiming that she had gone to look for him at his compadre's house, where he had gone to take refuge. This couldn't be true, since after the previous scene, the lady stayed in bed, and she still hadn't gotten up. The gossip ladies, seeing that, decided to warn him that death was prowling around the place, since they had noticed the presence of the cart of death. It is not good to be circulating through the streets, and the one who wondered so much could be confused, by death, with the person whose turn it was to die. Being so drunk, he behaved so incredulous and irreverent, and he simply ignored the warning. When nightfall arrived, the population had already gathered in their homes, as a precaution in case it was true about the cart of death. The only sound they heard were the scandals of Rodrigo. He sang, as if he were the happiest being in the world, and he did it very loudly, so that everyone could enjoy it. Suddenly, a terrible scream was heard everywhere, worsening the nervousness of the night. A very strong blizzard was felt that opened at the same time the doors and windows of all the houses on the street where he sang Rodrigo. Could see Rodrigo running with a look of panic and still articulating that awful scream. Those who managed to look closely at his face commented that his face had a rictus of terror, his eyes were crazy. No one found out, much more than that, and they kept a certain distance, because everyone could hear the famous wailing of the wheels of the chariot of death. They could even feel the strong heat emanating from the fire from the horse's jaws. That was left for the annals of long horror stories. The corpse of Rodrigo was found at the door of his mother's house. You could see the places where he scratched the door trying to get through. The battered woman was sick in her bedroom because of her wicked son. Perhaps if she hadn't mistreated her mother, she would surely have been able to get out of bed and open the door for her son to save him. The second story under the title Cursed Guests. It was a house that had seen better days, but the family came to live in it with great optimism, without caring about the poor condition of the house. This was the opportunity to start a new stage in their family life. On the night of the day of the move, by habit developed over time, the 6 brothers managed in a single room. They liked this room because you could see a tree from the window. It was planted right next to the house. Although the joy of their new home was enough, it was more exhaustion, and so they fell asleep almost immediately. In the middle of the night, they heard a very particular sound. It had a rhythm and it was constant. The father got up. He went to the boys' room at once. His intention was to claim them for continuing without going to bed. However, he did not manage to even reach the door of the room. In the middle of the corridor, towards the room, the half-lighting provided by the natural satellite of the Earth allowed him to see the silhouette of a human being hanged in the middle of the children's room. This form rocked and bumped its legs against the wall. Wanting the others not to panic, she controlled herself so she could decide what to do. His biggest nerve was in the fact that the hanged man was one of his children. This shook him. At some point he couldn't take it anymore and screamed with fear. The father's scream woke everyone up. They got up quickly, and one of the boys turned on the light. The others hugged each other frightened. Once the bedroom was illuminated, the figure hanging from a rope was no longer to be seen, and the father gradually calmed down. Just in case, he asked them to change rooms, and he put them to bed with him in his room, where he did not sleep, but spent the night awake taking care of his children. He was very tense. He was waiting for dawn to analyze what had happened with a cold mind. It was already part of one of the long horror stories. The night seemed endless. He kept hearing the same noise that made him go to the room, only now he knew it was the hanged man's feet hitting the wall. He steeled himself to witness the scene again. This time he did not see a hanged man, but the noise came from a man who was not very strong but very annoying, who was hitting a girl in the head with bats. He managed to have the necessary calm to illuminate the room, and so the visions were gone, but he sensed that this was not a permanent solution. It didn't take long, and it happened that the specters appeared in the next dark room, which was where they were sleeping at the time. An old woman, carrying a hatchet and pulling a blood-soaked scroll, was seen through the entrance to the bedroom, and she spattered the bloody effluvium on the boys resting on the floor. Terrified, the father turned on the lights. The apparition vanished with any trace that it had been in the room. In a fit of what seemed like madness, the father lit every corner, in full view of his surprised family. Every night exactly the same thing happened, always around midnight. There was some macabre death scene. On many occasions the father managed to give light to the entire house, without the family noticing. When he couldn't do it, he was forced to witness his macabre appearance. He didn't understand what was happening. Investigating, he found out that a sweet old lady lived in that house with her sickly but nice grandson. Definitely, in life they were not as good as they said. It was enough to see the way they suffered. Only those who spent the night in the house knew it. Now what the father had to decide was to leave or learn to live with the curse of the previous inhabitants. It is not easy to be part of the story of one of the long horror stories. The third story under the title Any Night. As a good beginning of one of the stories of the long horror stories, it had gotten dark like so many other times. Nothing was different from other days. It had been raining, then it cleared up and I decided to go running. It's a pleasure I've always had, running on puddles of water. As I run my feet and legs, with the humidity they begin to cool down, and that makes me have to make more effort when jogging. Another thing that I really like is receiving the cold breeze on my face. I like the sensation of this cold in my nose and mouth. This makes running require a greater effort to breathe. But above all, I like to go to the park to jog. It is the best place in these seasons. I like it because the fog covers everything and I do not see what is in front. If there are more people, I practically do not notice. It is like being alone, enjoying the world, totally free vitality. I enjoy the effort of my body when jogging in these conditions. It encourages me to improve myself, to put more effort into the trot. Trotting through the mist, I bumped into something soft and large. It couldn't be a stone. Moreover, there was no reason for a big stone on the road. Besides, a kind of lament could be heard. Of course I fell to the ground because of the blow. I got up and went back to see what I had hit. I looked at the floor and around the sides and found nothing out of place. I checked and I didn't see anything different. I thought there was nothing, until I turned around and found some legs at eye level. It was a floating creature. It looked like a girl. Without giving me a chance at anything, it pounced on me, and wrapped my neck like a constrictor until I passed out. He finally regained consciousness. I returned home convinced that everything had been due to forcing my body. I gasped for breath and passed out after experiencing hallucinations. Looking in the mirror, I realized that everything had happened. I could see injuries on my neck and from a couple of holes, some blood came out. My face looked very pale and I could feel the blood burning in my veins. I felt my heart slow down. Suddenly it stopped beating and I collapsed. The pain I felt was unbearable and I began to shake uncontrollably. It was so intense that I felt like my skeleton was suffering. I was unconscious again. Upon regaining consciousness, to my surprise he was very well, in better condition than ever, huge, strengthened, with power. He couldn't stop smiling. He was very happy for no reason. The discomfort and painful sensation was now pure fuel. I felt like I wanted to fly away and do it faster than the wind. I jumped to my feet, began to trot around the house, and without further ado, I jumped out the window, feeling freer than ever. The mist parted like a curtain for me to pass through, and closed behind me where there were beautiful wings. I love how the cold forms frost on them, which makes me flap stronger, just as I love the whistle of the wind between my fangs. This makes me feel strong and very free. Now at night, I like to fly through the fog and hide in the foliage of the trees, to fall on my victims and satiate myself with their warm blood. It is fabulous to feel how the blood enters my body and takes away my thirst and hunger. I like to bury my fangs in his veins. I like being just another character in long horror stories. Fourth and last story in this series of stories is called The Eternal Night. The enthusiasm of Maria Luisa, it was huge. He hadn't seen his little sister for a long time. When she left, her little sister was left in the care of her mother, in the town where they lived. Meanwhile, she was studying and preparing for a profession in the city. The truth is, he did not remember having spent much time together with his relatives. When she was a little girl, she had been sent away from her with other relatives, for her to study. She was already an adult and had graduated. Nothing prevented her from seeing her sister and mother again. In the years of separation, she had only visited them at a few parties. They practically only spoke on the phone. He did not tell them that he would visit them. He wanted it to be a surprise. Neither the mother nor his daughter knew of his arrival. Upon arrival, she observed that everything was strange. She did not remember anything from when she left. Nobody was seen in the streets. Everything looked empty. She was forced to walk to her family's home, since she could not find transportation or a taxi to take her. When she passed by the houses and they looked at her, people entered her houses and closed the door. After walking more than 60 minutes, she finally got home, very exhausted and sweaty. When she was about to go in, she realized that she hardly remembered anything. She only had the memory of her mother bringing her into the house as the night approached. Evening. She waited a while and someone opened it. It was her little sister. She looked worn out, extremely pale, and she just sighed. Her little sister hadn't recognized her. Only when Maria Luisa he caressed her, it was that he knew who she was. The sister began to shudder. At first she believed it was the impact of surprise. After a while she realized that the reason is different. The sister accompanied her to see her mother. To her surprise, she was exactly the same as the last time she saw her as a child, only she did not speak or move. She was staring at some point in space. Not even the girl imagined that she was beginning to be part of one of the long horror stories. She approached her mother affectionately and caressed her, but when she looked at her little sister she saw a strange expression. She gave the impression of being very scared. They went to another area of the house, but once there, instead of questioning her about her life, the little sister claimed that she had arrived without warning and suddenly. To calm her sister, she announced that she would not stay for many days. She only greeted the family and left. She also wanted to know if she wanted to go live in the city with her older sister. That they would put mom somewhere where she would be well cared for and they would live together so they could share her lives. The little sister did not give any answer, but her eyes filled with tears. This caused even more surprise to her. Maria Luisa she went to what was her room as a child. She was kept intact. She fell asleep and woke up to sounds upstairs in the house. It was very late at night, but she didn't find anyone. She went out to the patio, and when she looked closely she could see her mother taking flight. She let out a horrible laugh that left her frozen. She tried with all her might to wake up, because she thought it was a nightmare, but nothing happened. The night had no end. She curled up and kept trying to wake up, until she felt a hand that touched her. She opened her eyes and could see that she was her little sister. She told him, "You must get out of here immediately, because the endless night is coming and you will not be able to get out." The explanation she gave him was so scary, like seeing her mother flying from her. Her progenitor was the sorceress of the place. When the largest moon arrived in the town, all the sorceresses of the area would gather. They knew this as the night that has no end. Maria Luisa asked his little sister, "Why don't you run away to my house? Come with me." To this the little sister replied, "I can't. I'm the chosen one to be the heir to our mother's position." This is the reason why her mother had taken her away from her mother's house. There could only be one heiress, the other should die. To save her, her mother sent her away from her. Upon hearing this, she fled to her urban home and she did not return to the town, nor did she hear from her family again.